Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Mani Padme Hum.
So we will begin this morning with the opening prayers in the prayer book, beginning on page 10, and we'll just go through them once in English and then once in Tibetan. All mother sentient beings, especially those enemies who hate me, obstructors who harm me, and those who create obstacles on my path to liberation and all-knowingness, may they experience happiness and be separated from suffering. I will quickly establish them in the state of the most perfect and precious Buddha. Thus, until I achieve enlightenment, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. Until death, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. From now until this time tomorrow, I perform virtuous deeds with body, speech, and mind. And then on page 3, all limitless sentient beings, limitless as space, take refuge in the kind root Lama Vajradhara, the embodiment of the body, speech, mind, qualities, and activities of the Buddhas of the 10 directions and 3 times, source of the 84,000 categories of the teaching, and Lord of the Sanghas. We take refuge in the kind root Lama and lineage Lamas. We take refuge in the deities of the mandalas of the Yirams. We take refuge in all the exalted Buddhas. We take refuge in the perfect Dharma. We take refuge in the excellent order of the Sanghas. We take refuge in all the noble Dakas, Dakinis, and Dharma guardians, possessors of the eye of wisdom.
Dhammi chu nam la chab se je Abhe gyange nam la chab se je Om Gandai Chechang Sumbe Tso Ye Je Jan Han Dhamma Nam la chab se je
Until I attain the heart of enlightenment, I take refuge in all the Buddhas. I take refuge in the Dharma and likewise in the assembly of the Bodhisattvas. As the previous Buddhas embraced the enlightened mind and progressed on the Bodhisattva's path, I too, for the benefit of all sentient beings, give birth to bodhicitta and apply myself to accomplish the stages of the path.
Oi, chong joy, nying boy, che che, wai, sang je, nam lai, jiao zhen, che, chu dai, chang joy, san bai, ye, an zo lan, de yin, jiao zhen, che dai, mo je, de je, chang joy, to ne, ji ba, dang, chang joy, san bie, lao bai,
And on page 5, in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha most excellent, I take refuge until enlightenment is reached. By the merit of generosity and other good deeds, may I attain Buddhahood for the sake of all sentient beings.
Oi, sanje, chodan, soje, chonan, lai, changjo, pade, dane, chosen, che, ndake, jen soi, jimbe, sonan, che, dola, pinje, sanje, dobai, so.
May all mother sentient beings boundless as the sky have happiness and the causes of happiness. May they be liberated from suffering and the causes of suffering. May they never be separated from the happiness that is free from sorrow. May they rest in equanimity, free from attachment and aversion.
Oi, mai, nam ga dai, nyam be, sen jen, tam je, de wa dai, de we, ju tan, den bai, joy, je, dong ra dan, dong ra ge, yin ju dan, je wa ra, joy, je, dong ra mi be, de wa dong, de wa, joy, je, nye ren, cha dan, nye dan, je, dong yang, nye bai, joy, je.
And then on page 6, refuge of all sentient beings without exception, divine subjugator of terrifying Maras, together with their hosts of demons, the one who understands all realities without exception exactly as they are. Transcend and conquer, together with your disciples, please come here to this place.
Mona mare jese jenjor de chondan proje nida so arma padin peze tube
Aloke
gende niwe de chana badin so
Page 7. The ground is sprinkled with scented water and strewn with flowers. It is adorned with Meru, the supreme mountain, the 4 continents, and the sun and moon. As a Buddha field, I offer it. May all sentient beings attain the happiness of the Buddha fields. Whatever merit I have gathered through prostrations, offerings, confession, rejoicing, beseeching, and praying, for the sake of the enlightenment of all sentient beings, all this I dedicate. And on page 11, Namo, to the Lama of utterly pure appearance and existence, I offer the fundamental ground of appearance and existence. I supplicate you to thoroughly liberate the 3 realms. Please grant your blessings and overturn the depths of samsara. Sublime Master, wish-fulfilling jewel, crown ornament, the inconceivable, inexpressible mind of the victorious ones, the one endowed with the 5 wisdoms of omniscience, gracious one, the embodiment of love. Precious protector of beings, I supplicate you from within the essence of mind. Please grant your blessings from within the innate nature. Please bless me that I may realize the Dharmakaya that is beyond intellect, this primordially unborn, completely pure mind. Transcending conqueror, the one thus gone, foe destroyer of afflictive emotions, completely perfected Buddha, endowed with logic and virtue, the one gone to bliss, knower of the world, captain, tamer of beings, the unexcelled teacher of gods and men, I respectfully prostrate, completely touching my head to the stainless feet of the unequaled Shaki king. At the time of your birth, leader of 2-legged beings, taking 7 steps on this great earth you proclaim, I am supreme in this world. To you who are wise, even then, I prostrate. Possessing a body of complete purity, your sublime form is excellent. An ocean of primordial wisdom, you are like a golden mountain. The one whose renown is evident throughout the 3 worlds, protector of supreme attainment. To you I prostrate. To you who are endowed with the supreme marks, whose face is like an immaculate moon. To you, the one with a complexion like gold, I prostrate. A flawless one such as you, among the 3 levels of existence, is most exquisite. Unparalleled, omniscient one, to you I prostrate. Supreme among humans, captain of those to be tamed, the one thus gone who severs the all-binding fetters, who, with senses pacified, is utterly pacified and skilled in peace. To that one, the one who dwelled at Shravasti, I prostrate. Refuge endowed with great compassion, totally omniscient one who indicates the way, ground basis for oceans of merit and qualities, I prostrate to the one thus gone. The pure cause free from attachments, the virtue that liberates from the lower realms, the altogether supreme ultimate truth, to the pacifying Dharma I prostrate. Having been liberated, they also reveal the path to liberation. Thoroughly respectful of the 3 higher trainings, they are a field of sublime qualities. To the Sangha I also prostrate. And then back to page 9.
Dovai Junze Rinpoche, Dasami Jirgane Sogande, Chuni Jirgande Chinjelo, Asamdune Jime Nandande, Nande Chuga Dobar Chinjelo, Chon Dende Dije Yava. Yon da bara do be sanje ba dan ya zhen de ma de wa yi ba ji dan jam ji be de wa ka lo jo wa la na mi ba la ha me nam ye nam ba nya me sha ji ya ba小姐的这么没把郎，我让的都得讲在，放在半年做就当在，再见的老公把对我的呢，那年节天的那就结束。天天把起来上山，弄到公安就对手上来，一切将做世界门光的。看他们今天从哪两年来，我祝你节哀就真了。天中的满地面的微笑，山坡的瓦起来江山路的人就，满地年面渐渐起来江山路，每家的外可多就在见，跟着来境外就在见你。我不是当你也让给你有把的拉江山路，我不独见见的把，看见见的都把不，我说那有的江走心，这些也拉江山路。江浙路他边多家地位节，给别人送来着些，这个同党就写就了就了江浙路，多年特别好样的，老爸打来老哥。看不用难解，
And then on page 15, we'll just do this one in English, right? I prostrate to the youthful Manjushri, to those, make sure everybody have it. We'll start over. I prostrate to the youthful Manjushri, to those in the worlds of the 10 directions, however many there are, all the lions among humans who appear during the 3 times. To all of them, without exception, I pay homage with respectful body, speech, and mind. The force of my aspiration prayer for excellent conduct brings all the victorious ones directly to mind. Bowing down with bodies as numerous as atoms in the realms, I prostrate to all the victorious ones. In a single atom, there are Buddhas as numerous as atoms, each residing in the midst of their sons and daughters. Like that, I imagine the whole Dharmadhatu completely filled with victorious ones, to those with oceans of inexhaustible, praiseworthy qualities, with sounds containing oceans of tones of melodic speech. I express the qualities of all the victorious ones. I praise all the Sugatas. With the finest flowers, the finest garlands, music, ointments, supreme parasols, supreme lamps, and the finest incense, I make offerings to those victorious ones. With the finest cloths, supreme scents, and fine powders equal to Mount Meru, all displayed in supreme and magnificent ways, I make offerings to those victorious ones. With vast and unsurpassable offerings, I venerate all the victorious ones. Through the power of faith and excellent conduct, I prostrate and offer to the victorious ones. Whatever negative actions I have performed with body, speech, and also mind, overpowered by desire, aggression, and stupidity, I confess each and every one of them. I rejoice in everyone's merit, the victorious ones of the 10 directions, the Bodhisattvas, the Pratikya Buddhas, those in training, those beyond training, and all beings. I request the protectors, the lamps of the worlds of the 10 directions, who passing through the stages of awakening, attain Buddhahood beyond attachment, to turn the unsurpassable Dharma wheel. I supplicate with my palms joined together those who intend to demonstrate nirvana, to remain for kalpas as numerous as atoms in the realms, for the welfare and happiness of all beings. I dedicate whatever slight virtue is accumulated through prostrating, offering, confessing, rejoicing, requesting, and supplicating to enlightenment. Then on page 16, please turn the wheel of the Dharma of the two vehicles and their combination according to the dispositions and mental capacities of sentient beings.
Good morning. Jersey Laglen Sonda Subdima Tinutine Jetandi Bekechimbore Tene and then Kechimbore, da Kechimbore Siati Jetan Jikendi Nala, Tene Nego Kabla, Jikendi Nala, Yaboji Neake, Candice Nego, Yabo Candice Nego, Tiana Yiki, Tetanyam de Energy, the Lamp in Yamle Chimina, Tato Yang in Tarota, Tempting Chimney, not top. That Niji, we are in Jikendi, Nesia, Kala Versana, Jikendi Kinana, a challenging Mamboji Yorwa, difficulty Mamboji, the Canadian of the Jersela and Yamboji, Jantopina, Chico. Zumbling Dina challenge to that only Chitu to grace.
So we began with these teachings a couple of weekends ago on the 37 Bodhisattva practices. And the set of instructions that are contained in the 37 Bodhisattva practices are really very important. You know, as we live amidst the world, And whatever our activities, whatever our, however it is that we move through the world, we know that there are a great deal of challenges and hardships that come our way. And so the 37 Bodhisattva practices both are really pertinent advice to helping us to navigate these challenges and difficulties that we encounter amidst the world, or amidst our experience in the world. And likewise, they really truly are the practices that lead to our eventual awakening, or reaching this state of fully perfected awakening or enlightenment. And so when we abide by these instructions that we find here, when we really take them to heart and practice accordingly, then we really become equipped to take on any challenge that might confront us in the world. Whatever it is, we can take it on.
main practice de la ni pa sa sa tin du tene da te zabe ke tsek de la nian ji chuo lan do cha chu de yu da ye chuo la he dang me dang ba lang do ji bi de mu mu na jian he yu bong ma de se lang ni is.
So we are on the second verse of the text, which reads, "The mind of attachment to loved ones wavers like water. The mind of hatred of enemies burns like fire. The mind of ignorance which forgets what to adopt and what to discard is greatly obscured. Abandoning one's homeland is the Bodhisattva's practice." So the way that Rinpoche will be teaching on each verse is actually how he also mentioned this in last weekend, that he'll give us kind of two ways of looking at the verse. One, by giving kind of a word for word explanation, which is also, I will just let you know as a note of translation, that sometimes that comes off as a little bit confusing because the wording in Tibetan is different. So the words, it's not word for word according to the English. It's word for word in the order that it's given in the Tibetan. So that's why sometimes when it's translated into English, it feels like it gets kind of all mixed up. But that's just because the order of the wording, the sentence structure, is different in the Tibetan. And then following this word for word explanation, then he'll give kind of a general overall explanation of the verse itself.
Tendi jegla ko rangi ka je babu ngu yorwa mje kita ngone chi chute pe pushing do kan chi bu wo pe thana yi ke ji nga so ji nian ji chola tene ji cha yong be kabla tene tele ji be nga so ku long do ji ji dan cha le nga so te chi yorwa wo chang jiao sen gon la de tene ji chang jiao sen gon ku long do ji chi planning do ji che ne tene gon gu yorwa tendi ma yin ba tene ji ngone ko ji rangi kile unko e la chudi o tiana o ta la okay that la
So as it says, attachment to loved ones or desire for loved ones wavers like water. So this, in the Also, sometimes the word in Tibetan, which is truk, it can also be translated as like gets stirred up. So it gets like stirred up.
The waterfall should the person continuation younger your magic should be tear the pushing chair kind of
in any case, but it means also like wavering, as it says here, and the like in a water, a body of water, whether it's a river, like a stream or a waterfall, it kind of follows its own pattern just naturally. It flows or it falls in a natural way without anyone having to sort of like push on it. And so when there is so with bodhicitta, when we meditate on bodhicitta, there's not necessarily actually any planning for that. It just kind of arises naturally. Planning. Oh, planning.
The motivation planning naturally, like it is like waterfall, whatever it is naturally.
So this desire, attachment to loved ones, it doesn't actually take any sort of planning or kind of objective or intention. We don't have to create it. It just arrives naturally, sort of grasping and clinging, sort of like the natural flow of the water. Whereas on the other hand, when meditating on bodhicitta, that actually takes real intention. It takes kind of like a plan to develop bodhicitta. It takes actual concerted effort. Whereas the afflictions just arise naturally on their own without any effort needed.
What is it? Diet or Shadam Madam Barra, the major parts are united. Badegri, Teleyoung to Jipe, pushing the Kanchigo Maro, could naturally barring my bit and I shadowed along with Galatine, could Jik long with is member.
And so and then it says the mind of hatred towards enemies burns like fire. And so likewise, the blazing of a fire, burning of fire, is totally natural. There's no sort of pushing that is needed to, to cause the fire to blaze. This happens naturally, as does the hatred, the afflictions such as anger or hatred that arise in the mind.
Tanga to Tiri, Samletini, a jig dollar chapajig, the mother Niala chapajig, a dollar down what you are. Farma said, Farmasim change, Farma Labroa, not die on my Nimba. The knitting Dosha Jesse, you on my Imba, Simia to do not to Yever, torn the water, he would take some Pangamarwa. That things on the Mambo Toyandoa, Jig Bena. Jiglamga Gando, which is ready, you know. Then a committee, Natoko Topoda Wina, Lansan, Korisha, Kodna, Slenen, Rochigroa. In a tenor to Kaya, the Gondivado, Kayam, Moshimina, Tayo Mashako, Labgrota, Kochi. When it's that the Mogrimato, when it's met so on Nayuna, they saw on a Jabu. You know, Javak, the Bayoma, or that Shaka, Tikala, these days much worse. Or maybe Mount Balaji, young cigarette, some grow or Temdo to cigarette, touch it or much harsher labroa. What in that that the move is the move maybe in a share of Chamboji Yuvina, then when you pay Mitchell question of you at that Jabu. Pentocasi or Yavakasi or what indeed get in it, is Mubadians.
So then it goes on to say, the mind of ignorance which forgets what to adopt and what to discard is greatly obscured. So actually what this particular ignorance is kind of referring to is a sort of indifference. So, for instance, we have strong attachment to friends and loved ones. We have strong aversion or dislike for enemies or those that we dislike. And then we also have a whole bunch of people toward whom we feel kind of indifferent. Those that are sort of fall in the middle, and people we don't know and so forth. And so, for example, if we're walking along the road and we see that somebody has fallen over, and then if we know that person, if that person is our friend, where one is immediately sort of rushes to their side to help them and thinks, oh my gosh, it's that person, and they feel inspired to help the person. But then if someone one doesn't know has kind of fallen over, then there's sort of maybe a kind of regard, but sort of it's like, oh well, we don't know what's going on there, let's just sort of keep our distance. And this is actually this sort of mind, because of this attitude of indifference toward the individual. But really that's like ignorance, because really all beings, we should feel motivated to help and protect equally. But these, and especially these days, with this example of somebody who maybe has fallen over or tripped or something, then there's also the concern of, sort of litigation and so forth. So one might think, oh, well, actually best not to get involved. I don't know what's going on there. And like with this could end up, becoming something that kind of ends up becoming a problem for me. So best to just sort of like let it be. And so that not having that instinctual response to want to rush to another's help, to protect them and to help them, is actually a form of ignorance. It's because of the ignorance that comes from regarding certain objects or certain individuals with indifference.
Tene payu pongwa zong da dilin de hishu da payu pongwa se de ji payu pang sha wi na tene kong de ji da te yang tene ji nyong a ta nian te nyong a yo de sen da payu pang go de sta te hin du dun de ji de tene yang cho ji shu yin.
So then it says therefore to abandon one's homeland is the Bodhisattva's practice. So because one's homeland, where there are a lot of kind of everyone is sort of fallen into the category of a friend or loved one, or on the other hand, an enemy, or those who we dislike, then the advice is, in order that that strong mind of attachment and aversion may diminish, to leave one's homeland, to travel to other places where the afflictive emotions of desire and attachment and aversion are not so strong, is the advice here, the Bodhisattva's practice. So this is the brief explanation that is sort of word for word. So then to give you another explanation.
이런 거네 지는 다 세야지 다 로다 향조지 가지고 로다 요런데 다리 세야지 티인들다 다 세야텔라 테네 지 오다 소리 됐어 다 first maybe 도착 오케이 테네 저 당가서 다 삼노지 땅위는 테네 도착 세야되다 휴침부 쉬우리 저 당가서 추치야 게다 같이 조어대 갈세나 차단이 보인 말이 티인들 당가서 즉 sabza majiwi na tene tan docha chesi ki yu samji meshawa ji yore ji matota sel chag yore khol chag yore juchala la chag yore ta tene chini chik chane cha de yore tazamazi be ta tanda matotero wa suspicious conduct 가서는 지금 뭐니 차파쇼 전부 지응비가라 되는 그런 기가 나 요강도 못 대봐요. 근데 뭐니 랑도 참고 진도 거다. 용기도와 근데 지금 뭔가 희귀배 지 복중중나 작반로지 될세. 근데 지금 뭐니 전에 있다 근데 기지 차회기 유기 치들라. 근데 직다 대표 뭐 속을 거래. 이내 대표 대신 대비 요리 이내요. 그때 못 다 차파 첨부지 용비가라. 근데 그 가세보다 랑도 가리야 보이마 가르도 보이마 되더니 진노 yes
The chapa yogi gyms and not any pugu say you like you.
레단다 히트니 질도와 되니 그 차파지 되니 복세그로 복트고리 제메트고리 딱한 강이 뭔지 요와
Been around you yet.
어떻게 샤샤리서
So the first one about attachment to loved ones, it is sometimes the desire and attachment for loved ones or for others can become very strong. So this is really the attachment part, and then it creates all sorts of obstacles. So whenever there is strong attachment, then likewise there is aversion that follows. If there's strong, because attachment and aversion go hand in hand. And so often at times then there are cases where craving and lust or attachment to particular objects, people or things can really lead to all sorts of really negative conduct. It can lead to sexual misconduct. It can actually end up leading to all types of violence. And so it is really important to recognize when there is strong craving and attachment, because when there is strong craving and attachment, then one forgets, as it says here, one forgets what to adopt and what to discard. So this kind of discrimination becomes greatly obscured, and it can lead to all sorts of forms of negative conduct or non-virtue. Nunichini the chu dam yo senat the temple yo mare the
no, that's not no.
Oh, okay.
That's wrong. What they said there?
Gayan senat in that the chapa yo na the chapa sewa temple de marawa the nima check the na the sewa yore nima shema the dangwa yore to that kogarawa the doctor yene came in
teni marawa ko chapa 이 그 dangwa 는 조단 요구로와 tene 제타다 대송의 가상에서 종지라 임바처럼 땡기도에 종지 요레스 뭐지 참디 요레스 뭐지 참디 되네 그 제비지 요레스 제비지 뭐로 제비지 냐디라 요와 냐 근데 그 냐디 키네 로레스 냐디 키노도 되네 배 제비 몽보 직 테네 배 딱고 주는 깔리 카네 되네 배 직 tendition that koranji 2 yard ya up and down wada but tendiji 2 ne pe miswi dungi samni ma jawa chongbres ina tamada ko photo ne tende ko nyat ma li hares te nyat li shabe ga tende ko koran pe release wa tende pe solo do ji chabres tende tende sambe nge o ta ngoni chi chapa sana chi pangbe na tende dewa to do some koran ke tamga do ji la yo that's a story.
So there's a story of so in any case this attachment and craving always results in suffering. So for instance, there's a story of a retreatant who was watching the birds outside of his retreat area. And there was a bird who had grabbed a hold of a fish. And then
he got the fish.
he got the fish, and then but then all of the other birds became, really wanted a piece of that fish. So the other birds were kind of chasing after him, and then it became a great, it was really difficult for the bird to hang on to the fish and escape all of the other birds who wanted some. And then finally, as
all the birds followed him,
so all the birds were following him or chasing after. And then finally, as he approached kind of the area of the retreatant, then he just let it go. He dropped the fish, and then the retreatant felt, oh wow, that is the release of letting go, the sort of the freedom that comes from letting go of attachment, and it became then a great lesson or pith instruction for the retreatant.
Tini ta chetang karsana tiga nagi nga zo ta chetang te yorwa chakpa seya jigda tsewa seya di yang jowan jikten zungu ti norya ke ngenka yore sungduwa kundawonda woji yore tini tini ko tsewa seya te goya jigdang chakpa seya di ko pang goya ji chadi yore tini ta tsewa seya di nga zo jik simja himbala yang tsewa gugure tiga nagi ke jik ta nang sasang inari suda suyina tini ko tsewa gugure 이나 다디 체바다 가리 요르세나 직문에 전에 제와 당 근데 차파님부 기여와지 연삼로 성당 미나 지금까지 차파서야다 망하지 나라고도 선바데 와 니기 야면 니기 부그래 니기 제메리 니 초와래 내 나라고도 선바지 토네 근데 지 급하게 몇테 유티 야보 치리요나 근데 뭐 차파차데 요레스 그러나 이거 주자라는 있는 거고 somebody. That's ever say at it, Carsena. Go higher ropa chipa chili or Yinaya, not a go to some ma say at your marriage. Chingone march the Hena, okay. That need chola tsewa you, Nijimela tsewa you, only to promote tsewa you, power mother tsewa that need to propachi at the tsewa, Geware is Jimmy Chapatala, Geware is.
So actually, Lord Jigten Sumgan points out the difference between attachment and love, and says that actually these two are very easily confused. In fact, there's always the danger of confusing attachment for love. So often it is very easy to get love and attachment mixed up. Love is a very positive thing. We all need love. All sentient beings need love. And so it doesn't, there's no one who doesn't need love. And so, yet the way to distinguish between love and attachment is that attachment is also bound by a feeling of I need something from this. So the love is actually not just a free sort of love without needing something or without expectations for oneself in return. So it is it really is distinguished by having need for oneself, and that that is directed toward whatever the object is that one feels attachment to. And so that is why there is often attachment mixed up with our love for our relatives and friends or loved ones. So we say, my children, my wife, my husband, my friend, and so on and so forth. And so even if we treat our loved ones for whom we have this great attachment, we treat them well, but there's still self-interest in it. There is still sort of the feeling of I need something from this person. There's some way in which our affection for them is bound up in our own wants and needs. And yet when there's really love, then we are just focused on benefiting and helping the other without any regard for something needed for ourselves. So our love is actually a kind of selfless love. We're not thinking that we need something ourselves out of the relationship. And so of course, you know, with our loved ones, it's important to nurture the love that we have. So we nurture the love and we diminish the attachment, so that we treat those in our life, in our family, our friends, our spouses and children and parents, with love. If we treat them, if we have love, then love is virtue. That's virtuous. But if we have attachment, then attachment is non-virtue.
제가 나이다 등산가 주로 이제 카스템 가래에서는 제 나랑 썸노 마탕이나 근데 나랑 그 도남도 사마리스 에 사메아케고다 남포지 용구여로 와 얘네야디 다 썸노 야보 땅비나 단다디 계신가 어디가 나인가도다 카스템 세나리 트레디션 세나리 간다지 뭐 처음에 출발라 뭐 나랑 제 마삼이나 근데 나랑 그 돈다 가야 놓고 말이 삼발로지 출발이 요레스 인다도 superficial 리마도 베게 통음에 돌 말이 제가 나 이게 양 가르점 부여라나 다 어떻게 나 지과로 당에 그냥 도야 그거 장 나랑 다 가야 놓고 삼발로데 삼모땅 말이 야보 삼모땅비나 근데 다 차파 세야 디게 차파 코라양 뭐네 랑이 첩되어지 요 말이 이네야 가서 론 진탕 텔레테니 이니 디기가 차파 디게다 넘버 토픽에 차파 디게 데비드 동의지 냥 랑 인디비주얼 동의 냥 티인도 지 차파 빵와 텔라 파르조를 쇼치 뭐 그냥 토고 요나리 그냥 토고 메비 나리 이네야 통 몸에 토라 랑 동의 기자 제일 저성 땅 Yes.
So actually, it seems we kind of have a custom of sort of, or a culture that kind of collectively holds this attitude of, you know, if I don't address my own needs, if I don't think of myself, then I won't. You know, then I won't get what is needed. Then actually this will end up being to my own detriment. And so there's kind of this feeling like we're afraid a little bit to completely let go of self-interest, because we think if we let go of self-interest, then somehow we're gonna then we'll be you know, that we'll lose something, or that we won't get what we need. But this is actually a very superficial way of thinking of it, because you know, and so therefore we think, oh, if I really kind of give up my own sort of grasping to somehow benefiting myself in this, and really kind of give all of the gain and benefit to the other, you know, or to this other person, then I'll really be at a loss. I won't be able to accomplish, you know, what I intend or what I need. But really, actually, the truth of the matter is that it is actually the direct opposite, because when through fixation and attachment we have grasping, those concepts that cause us to hang on or to grasp actually cause a lot of pain, a lot of suffering. So they actually, it is the grasping and self-interest that actually ends up being kind of the most detrimental to our own well-being. And so on the other hand, when we are focused on the welfare and benefit of others, then then there's the opposite effect, is that actually one is free of the pain of grasping, the grasping of the self-clinging. So when, whether we're benefiting the other or not, if there's a grasping bound up in that, if there's attachment, then we are causing hardship and difficulty for ourselves.
我在提起，今天这趟大提案呢，也给我说恰好帮为呢，今天我说到脑的提了多，脑那关键上呢，巧些吧，所以到脑是呀的，这忙不要的，我说3个月呢，5个月呢，3个月的，天那样，我那今天3个月呢，我从多把成个买的，5个月呢，多把成个买的，天呢，我说就把这个白下了，什么的，家伙呢，东国的，东呢，吃国的，吃有呢，帮国的。 他天天几头科技，你们想对送罗，那边去的，连车去趟了，送的连车去，这连车去的就东的位呢，的那个靠公园的，把所有个差不了，的那个也兜了，出去东的呢，我那别的呢也，我提前到把参不呀，要么话，我就吃花心吧，开始就有位呢，今天他提前呢，吃花心吧，开始呢我谈到卡里有的，要不的，上把我到俺的这个都上把天天就有位呢，的呢，但我那去呢我做。 추보래 추보 차디요래 스테마도 베킹아도 지 문에 추보세야 돼 섬노 야보직 당에는 뭐 추보세야 돼 섬노 당 맞다 카토바 directly no scenario our own concept 추보세는 되네 지다 동해 강하며 배 지고래 노지 섬고요 고 추보래 그러고 이나다디 superficial 외와 이나 섬노 협다지 당위나 他去过米兰、屯兰的原因啦，东西特别忙哟了哇，他那去过茶药嘛了哇，他去过是茶药的时候呢，没几个人到哪看的也有呢，他定这个都，他那他白要我轻松，他那定这个都上面有呢，东西要嘛了哇，他没去过茶的哟嘞，yes。这太阳的呢，他地方多嘞，他对我那今天晒的、牛的，出去晒的，晒汤。 무당 배샤리니 야차디요. Yes.
And so it is said that if one abandons attachment, this is like the greatest of all riches. This is the most supreme of all riches, because among all of the kind of most precious of substances on this earth, like gold and silver and jewels, or all the money and wealth in the world, as long as that is what, as long as one has attachment or craving for these material things, then one is never filled or satisfied. So no matter how much money one makes, one can still always get more. There's still always kind of a hankering for more. If you have 100,000, then you want 200,000 or 300,000 and so forth. And so it's just like it is said here later in the text, as much as one sort of indulges in craving or sense pleasures, then one's thirst only increases, like drinking salt water. And so when the object of attachment is constantly one is hankering after the objects of attachment, one never really feels fulfilled or satisfied. In fact, it never really satisfies one's craving or attachment. In fact, it's usually quite the opposite, that one's craving and attachment becomes worse and worse, or stronger and stronger. And so that is why also it is said that there is no wealth like the wealth of contentment. Because really, if you think about it, the word, at least in Tibetan, to say that somebody is rich, then we think like, oh, the person who is rich, is really, they really are enjoying life. They really don't have any suffering. But this is a superficial understanding, which is almost always not true. And so, in fact, it is usually the case that the more wealth that one has, then often the more hardship and suffering actually, or that can often be the case. And so, so really, to have a mind state that says, with however much that one has, the attitude or the mind state that says this is enough, or I'm content with this. This is enough. That is a truly rich person. That's actually what kind of the definition of true wealth is. To be really wealthy or rich is actually to be content with what one has, and so. In the same way, that is why actually it is said that contentment is the greatest, or one who is content is truly rich.
Hodateri, Tineta Dai Chola Hedam Medamba, Soneta, Angoni Daya Sayajing out of Daji Sondina, Tambo Dai, Sambekala Tene, or Hedam Medam Barongari, Kodati Chi Yunare, Minare, number of Pajiwa. Number of Paji, doing us Dai, Samba, Kuni Dari, Kumini Pe Dari Lantene, Kochik Tombat some Jeketene, Mutik, Namjor Dubu, Tene, Kochipe. 가르치나 고 다로 수다 깨체지 라나더니 아주 공로라 그러와 이 제탄다 I don't know I'm the west counter kind of nga서 되네 nga서 부은다고 했나더니 텔라 그러와 기관으로 올라 그러와 배는 초고 촉창이나 얘네 배지 take plies, play, on the hand of kind of Marwa. Then Chokoji told you, Chokoji told so that to me. Yamana, our window, sometimes that he can't have in it. Copang or all of great, that Tenido Lagra. The Lagra in the Cope Gagra, go to Hora, oh, could pen a pango to Kawano, we would always the car cheese on Sayado, Lagra. In a Cope Gagra, go to Hora. In a good dad, or you gonna think you love in a go to Bajaga, that's how. Oh, that thing with me. Chitana to dying some big low ticket, can read it in a Koran Chitano in a get a car love in and Namjo Karadam in a that is some no Yunada, Minada, not so that cope. The border of it, which increasing as a man on body, not no log on it, yes.
So then, as it says, hatred for enemies burns like fire. So really, we can all identify with this pretty easily. That even the sensation of having anger or hatred towards someone has kind of a burning sensation. It has a feeling that's kind of like the blazing of fire. In fact, when we even just bring into our mind someone that we don't like, or someone who makes us really angry, someone who we might consider an enemy, the moment we bring them to mind, immediately there's sort of like this blazing feeling of anger that wells up inside. So even just the thought of the person can cause anger to arise. And so we have this kind of designation of this person as being kind of our enemy, or the person that we really dislike. And even just thinking about them brings up a feeling of anger. And so actually in Tibet, this is really probably quite different from our culture here in the West. But actually there's kind of this way of, when you're really tight with somebody, if you're really good friends, then you kind of chide one another. You sort of insult one another. So like you'll say, you'll call somebody ugly, or be like, hey, ugly, what's up? Or say,
see each other the best friends.
or say like, hey, you like worthless beggar, you good for nothing, you know.
Yeah.
And things
There's no honor in anything, you know.
You don't speak sort of politely or in an honorific way. You kind of chide one another, and actually this is something that actually becomes like a form of affection. So the person who is being spoken to like that actually really likes it, because they know it means that
also reply,
and then they'll reply in the same way and say like, oh yeah, well, you good for nothing beggar, how are you, you know, or something like this.
Yeah, beggar, ugly, whatever, you know.
Beggar, ugly, whatever. Crazy. And so
they enjoy, they're really happy just joking, you know, so just.
But on the other hand, when you meet,
and also sometimes this I don't know, maybe here too, like this sugar or
so they'll also kind of hit, like slap one another kind of hard, you know. Actually here they might kind of do that too, you know, sort of as like a kind of friendly, sort of playful, rough housing, I guess. And so in any case, on the other hand, when it's somebody who you really dislike, or somebody who's an enemy, then you would never address somebody like that in that way. If you were to, then it would like immediately become like a brawl, you know, people would really start fighting. And so I don't quite
but
sort of the point is really kind of comes down to perception, right? So it's just the perception in the mind that kind of designates whether somebody is a friend or an enemy.
Right, so one is bring the peace and one angry. So interesting is,
so I think what he's saying is this way of speaking, for instance, one person reacts to it with kind of delight, and it is kind of affectionate, right? But the other person reacts to it with real anger. So the difference in the response really just has to do with perception.
Or anger. That in the Hindu, that young as some tango, Jeta, Tayang today, Terida, Tani Konshua Yeva, Na, say at Dangzisia, Dacia, Telechi, Zochinetine, Teleji, Nalaji, Carson, Tonga, Shadan Laya, Tela, Karlang Yortina, Nichi called naturally protection of the Chichitin, Kandaji, Telegin, Shadan Yorwa. Utility, Zawad, Cartodusina, young, down the total Chiparita, and you got the Chapat Chipati.
And so what is it that causes this sort of anger to blaze? The root cause of the anger is actually the same root cause of the attachment or craving. It's the mind of self-clinging, the mind of self-grasping. And so really it's also it's a counterproductive response for the mind of self-grasping, because one thinks that through anger one is somehow protecting oneself, that one is actually, you know, meeting one's own needs, you know, seeing that one's own needs are met. But actually it is the opposite. But it's really the same thing that is going on in both the case of attachment and in the case of aversion or anger. They're both kind of a misguided attempt by the mind of self-clinging to seek one's own sort of benefit, or to somehow benefit or protect oneself.
Oh, that take us in Nipatam Chicken Jung Zawano Chadi is 대유도 되네 다 나지 요구나 되네 틀릴 때는 되네 잡아지게 그래 틀릴 때는 당화지게 그래 봐 근데 그 source of this 데려와 일반 중요 얘기를 중식이 잡아나오지 다 세야 되겠어.
All of the faults that arise out of sort of, thinking of oneself. So there's the word in Tibetan is da, which means self, or nga, which is I. So this sort of self thinking of the kind of I identifying mind, or the ego identifying mind, and all of the faults really stem from this self-centered attitude of ego or self-grasping. So this is really the root of all of it. And it's the source of both attachment and aversion. It's really the source of all of the defilements, the mistaken mind of self-grasping.
제가 나기 그 렐렌 탐지 찍려다 렐렌 탐지 가르치는 지 지야 찍도 좀 셈 써야 돼 나서야 돼 나서야 돼 이나 뒤인데 그냥 다 뒤겠지 뭐네 지는 당왕빵 차파빵 근데 지금 뭐네 샴페인치 근데 짐발라서 왔다미나 야 다티 permessi che vi ho sommi mi ho detto da ti ho detto is samboinada dogo chine chine da is
and so it is a kind of this sensation or this feeling that there is a sort of this solid thing of selfhood. There's sort of a personality and a self, and that is me. So then there's always kind of this where one is operating from the place of always trying to serve this self that we identify with. But really, when it is, when we let go of our grasping, when we let go of aversion, when we let go of craving or attachment, when we instead sort of choose not to focus so much on the self, and instead to really put our attention in benefiting others and practicing generosity, for instance, then the Da Zangpo Dupo China. Da Zangpo Dupo China.
Da sia tike Zangpo China chia yoba. Dupo China ben positive negative ninja chine zo lo cha yoba.
Oh, I see. So actually, so I think I kind of misunderstood that. Actually, the self has kind of the choice to either accumulate actions that are positive and wholesome, or to accumulate the actions that are negative. So it is also kind of in identifying with some sense of selfhood, then we can also choose to focus on the positive by cultivating the mind that wishes to benefit others and engaging in positive actions such as generosity, accumulating generosity and so forth. And so in that way, the self actually is the one who creates both the positive and the negative.
다 되네. 다 제가 나기게 데려다 즉 다 대표진 지파차디 있었더니 파유봉만 제셀라래 이좀 다 제당 파유빵세야 되려 다 내니 용거와 아직 파유빵세야 되려 지금원이 년을 특zam지 차밤매와 야라 특zam지 당와매와 근데 이 요비나 뭐 파유빵 말이 is the jiggy. Tinea, Jig Samre, Carsinaco, Payumone Panshana, this Jig Chuchiala, Lela Yungore. Jipayutilla, die Gilet Jungerwa, Unia Pansiat, and Jipanore, Tilly. Jipayula Didi, you know. That's another winner. Been no chop aren't the winner, touching when there's a jelly or Marita Mambo, Chita, as a column do your wa. In a young, Tanya pulled over the Titan, Jingzaman him on the winner. Go Muraman and Muramne, could Didi or wa. The Didi Kala, could Drati on Tinichi. Ah, then Muramdo, Dio, Tiny Park of Nipawatine, Consultation, they say, or Ni Pawatan, Nipawe Pawatan, Kopawe Pawani, Taris and Zengores, to Pajabare, say on the owner. What that today, young de Yorwa. Tinity, Chasiki Ute, Chipachichandoji. Tinity, Chuchewa Chivala, to Google, look your Chewa Chivala, to Google it, Tinity. Chicta telejo park uji lega jile dola mark lega jile dola ne punjak chick to mechi ropa cochina mande magina mande oda tini chineten chico corre norma thanks sabro doji mahola chuchia ke koka nyuma yorwa tinita hayu pangsha ya short yes only.
So then, as it says, abandoning one's homeland is the Bodhisattva's practice. So actually, there are two ways to understand abandoning one's homeland. So one is actually not literal, but actually, if one abandons or one causes attachments and aversions to diminish, then that becomes the same as abandoning one's homeland. That's what's really meant, because what is meant here is to cause the mind of attachment and aversion to diminish. But then also it is said that by abandoning one's homeland or going, traveling to some other place actually makes it easier to engage in Dharma practice. Especially, and actually there's more about this that comes up later in the text when it talks about, abandoning kind of negative places or places that cause our afflictive emotions to get more stirred up, in particular the mind of attachment and aversion. But also in America, it's a little bit different, or in the West in general, people really move around quite a lot. So actually there aren't so many people who, are born in a particular place and live there their whole lives and, stay there throughout, their entire life and their and generations back, it has been that way. So that's not, people generally in the West are much more kind of nomadic in that they tend to move around a lot. But in Tibet, at least in the old days, you would be, in one village that was the same village that your ancestors had lived in for centuries. There had been actually, like centuries of one's your own parents and grandparents and great-grandparents and so on and so forth. And so therefore there were also a lot of, so for instance, it often was the case that there were already very established kind of social codes of who it is that who is kind of considered your friends, or those that you have kind of an attitude of affectionate regard, and then those who are even enemies. Like it could be that several generations back, somebody killed your great grandfather, and even their descendants then are like the enemy of the whole family. So there are these kind of strong attachments and aversions that can come up in these, by being in one's, so living in one's homeland, for one's whole life. And in general, there are a lot of, because there's such a sort of strong attachments and also obligations, you know, to look after one's loved ones and to do, you know, to do certain things to help them, and there's sort of a lot of like social codes and pressure in regard to that kind of conduct that's all tied up in attachment and aversion. And so therefore, if one, you know, spends one's whole life kind of in the village, you know, bound with these responsibilities and kind of not ever getting a chance to leave a sort of this situation where the roles of friends and loved ones and enemies are so strongly established, not only because does it become difficult for one's attachment and aversion to diminish, but also it becomes difficult to really get any time to seriously engage in Dharma practice, or to really, you know, dedicate one's time to the Dharma. So there are fewer opportunities for Dharma practice in such a situation.
chapa himban roina show chimbo jekwa yo mares ina tiantene cho shenhe jide number to pa jide number to ko ya ngo maro tongbare jekri ni ne karesena jeo chane ngaso saya gogure tene tolo khona gogure paid bill do gogure ina ya shujeke ngaso teyang ji takpat temba yungu yo mare ji bena cha chawina nga tsoke jala jumne kandiji yugina ji nga tso pen cha shawe shibine kana kiya yo marwa jala jumne kiya yo mare chobo chomo cheya yo mare teza mazi bi hengwani nga tso luisi chobo chomo ro da choba jemendo suje cheya yo marwa budo cheya yo marwa teza mazi beke ji tanda nga tso ni lu o ni suku se pe han san ya ki chi ta ke chimbo dan tene pe za chimbo dan ngone nga tso sacrifice chi za zo de nga to da lu ndi ga chi yo ro wa o te te ya tene ko kia yo marwa ni ma pe ji yo wa tene lama je ke tene ko tanga ji na yo des han tam te la ben
Shabane ba ko ye. So, in brief, you know, it is important as Dharma practitioners that we do what we can to limit the extent of our attachment and craving, and to limit the extent of our anger, to not give rise to cause those tendencies to diminish, to not indulge in very strong arisings of attachment or aversion, and to recognize that they really come from our thoughts, that they are just based on thoughts, and those thoughts don't really have any real essence. They don't have any true substantial nature. And of course, we have to function with some degree of, you know, in the world, it's not as though, you know, we can go without food and clothing. We need food, we need clothing, we need to pay the bills. So we have to be able to function in the world. But we also have to understand that all of these things are kind of insubstantial in nature, that they're not permanent, that they're not lasting, that there's nothing in this life that is really permanent or lasting, and that eventually, in fact, we will die. And when we die, there's nothing of this world that we will be able to take with us, no matter how strong our attachment is. We won't be able to take our spouse with us. We won't be able to take our friends or companions, our children. There's nothing that will go with us at the time of death, even our very own body. We think, you know, we're so attached to our body. We think it is really us, you know, we fully identify with this physical form of the body. And we think it's so important. We have so much grasping and craving to the physical body. But even the physical body will be left behind. We won't be able to take it with us at the time of death.
Tene lama jeking ma damga jing now this ne ta damga ji now sin ta muje na wa lama ta na damga ji now chi chana bi shu tene chi bi tene lama ti tene ko ya ta chu di ne kap ji ti bos kap the kap ta chona ma yin zawa ni ne lu thong ma de wa nya gu ya po nya gu gres 대가 나 이게 tene chona pe event jo hibe ka ya tene kap ki hos labares Tene tambometikio ta digreya ya la macho la bana ichi slaviorwa. Tene con samno mombo ta ditini ta ko ke kaptari lutam ma dewa da ni chi to sare tamang ma de tene ko ma shebe ka la kap ka ni chi ko sare samyorwa. Tene ko tambo samno o ke min do ko de ma pa pe wa la sha na ma zo kha na digre samdo. Tene yang cha samno ji dong de. Oh. Tene ya de ro ya tene nga shebe ka cha ba ro de yang Mela target in Yamata, Chavilla Tegri or Tian, Tenia, Joy Lama Huge. What I wanted in a Lama Chanola, but not the was on something in a young. Can you let that pitch a minute to the cheat of some Maris? And I hear in a colony, Kito Samarella, the water, La make deal or that is Chanola Nagiris, Capgina. Tindigia, Kia Maris, Laura, or that Nagiris.
So there's a story which many of you have probably already heard, which became, it's a story in which a lama gave pith instructions to his one of his students, where the student came and requested pith instructions, profound pith instructions, and so the lama said, okay, I'm giving you this task, he said, and he gave him a needle, and he said, keep this needle with you everywhere that you go, hold it, have it on your body at all times, and carry it everywhere you go. Don't ever part from the needle. Keep it with you at all times. Even when you die, you must keep this needle with you. You must carry it with you into death. And so then the student was like, oh yes, lasso, I'm going to do whatever I can, I am going to absolutely follow your instructions. And so he took the needle with him, and he really was very cautious to always take it, have it on his body at all times. But then, and he was really thinking about how, oh, I need to take this needle with me when I die. That's challenging. How am I going to be? But the Lama said, I have to take it with me when I die. So I've got to find a way to do this. And so he thought, maybe if I sort of stick it right under my skin, then maybe when I die, I'll be, but then he thought of, well, that's not going to work, because when I die, then the body they'll just, cremate it, or maybe, there will be a sky burial, and they'll feed it to the birds. So I won't be able to bring it with me that way. How can I bring the needle with me? And he just couldn't, of course, he couldn't resolve, this conundrum. So he then went back to the Lama, and he said, I've done what you've said. I've carried I carry the needle everywhere. I never part from it, but I don't know how I'm going to be able to take it with me when I die. I think that I won't be able to do this. It seems impossible. Lama la is Amarawa.
Loves a lot to eat. Lady, Lama Lao, or Lady Chola, is Hibineka, Kapti, Kia, Maris.
And so the Lama said, exactly. He said, that is absolutely right. At the time of death, you can't take so much as even a needle with you when you die. And so, therefore, there really isn't any point in having too much attachment or aversion to any of the things of this world, or any of the things of this life. So it is in your best interest to diminish your attachments and aversions.
So that's it. So one works.
So that then it completes the second verse, the explanation on the second verse.
That the third one is Union Bombing no more than the dip. The me be Gajor on the pair, require with children and but then by just
So then number 3 is when harmful places are abandoned, disturbing emotions gradually diminish. Without distraction, virtuous endeavors naturally increase. Being clear-minded, definite understanding of the Dharma arises. Resorting to secluded places is the Bodhisattva's practice.
Tegana yi kijita naming sa sia emba la bro ne emba o tindi ya tini nengo es tindi tembi na tini jing ripa ta thama ro le es ripa thama le on be kala tini nga so ji chu bomba ina tini ya bo bom to ya sambe na ya bo sam to ya ta nyam na khadi chi na tini Nihe Tigris, Canadian, and but is.
So this is pretty straightforward to understand, you know, the meaning of the words here. So first it is saying, you know, to abandon harmful places or negative places. And to seek solitude, or to seek out solitary places, or places where one can abide in isolation or solitude. And what is meant by a solitary place is that, or a secluded place, is a place that is without many distractions. Now, a place where one can know that one who can abide sort of without interruption or distraction. And then when one is able to spend time in solitude like this without much distraction, then the mind becomes really clear. Awareness becomes clear and bright. And if one meditates, one is able to meditate well. If one contemplates the Dharma, one is able to contemplate clearly, or one is able to contemplate well. And as a result of that, one really develops a certainty. One is able to give rise to a sense of, you know, clear certainty.
That is the Hindu Shubina. The union Basiati, Bemesi, Opala, Kitchenbury, Jen, or Jen, Yulepe, Chebashu, that is something changed. Nato Bena Nenga Chunjung Doji Shubina, Benamaso Kanyore, Bena no job on the Kanyore, Bena Chuchiano, Yuro, you, Bena Chachavina. So, when a poketa, pokulungare to Tinani, then a G. Also, Chokan Temple, Man Monastery, Chokan Yorwa, what is Zotan? Tigana Yingata, then a puke bodanat. Logi Levina, Tini, who use Hambojirwa, Carsina, not some make it a charting yori, Monam Jagi yori, Kolo yori. Or a jaggy or what? Tindiger in the Raya Tinichi Tambuchu cheap or Masamna. Rangi, called you up with the Yotin, Tinichi Chochi Korak, Ranjin Bundoga, Najin Dogos and Tambu, Penangato Nadi de Vikalanga Korandogo, Chuchi was a make it. Now your money. I'm for your mother. Tinichi logic Thomas Homakora, Tinichi Chigro, Rangi Chuchi logo that is. Poraji Jagore, but someone mentioned the Raji with Kazunina. They told Marwa, then I saw you not don't any more Yak Chigro. What that equal, the Nanga Chunjung Doji, Choji, Richard, Tini, among the Tahashi. So they no shop quality, your money. Timidi, Chi Yulan Rover Gablatini, Chikelanga, your married, Chuchin, your married. Today, meditate, Kalikawa. 근데 나저 유 대류다 디유들라 유드 체발효다 아 대류 가서 집 조조 다다다 조조도 개체머리 예세야 가서 집 내가 집 다마센터에서 요기나 그 집 공부하고 이제래 그 사자들이 온데 뒤야 주체야 갖고 집 태용 거와 탱거리 탱데 집 텔레춘이나 제야 누마도 집 려는 거와 어떻게 되면 조조도 자칭으로 스케치머리 스타 발라대야지 이제 요기나 그 장기 naturally 팽겨레스 인다 된가 이 유년 방어들 기타 유년 바탕다 이 상보는 야라 그거 이 상보유나 같이 팽겨와
So it is actually really important to abandon or to avoid harmful places or negative places. And so even if you think, meaning like the conditions of our surroundings influence us tremendously. So to give even just like a small example, here in the West, we don't have, really like holy places or, places that we can go to where, everybody is practicing Dharma or everyone is engaged in spiritual practice. So in Tibet, for instance, there are these kind of holy sites all over. In Nepal, for instance, like if you go to the Jokang temple in Tibet, if you go to Bodhinath in Nepal, that's an example of like a really kind of like pure place, a pure and wholesome place, because everybody is engaged in spiritual practice there. You go there and everybody is doing prostrations. People are reciting prayers, people are reciting mantras, they're doing circumambulations. And so when you go to a place like that, you just naturally kind of fall into the rhythm or the flow of the people and the energy that is there. And so you go and then naturally you start doing circumambulations with everybody else, or you start reciting mantra, because everyone else is also engaged in mantra recitation, and you can just feel the purity of the energy that is in a place like that. And so this is just kind of a small example, but also here in the West, it is, we don't, as Dharma practitioners, it's challenging because it's not our environment or the conditions are not so supportive to our Dharma practice. We don't go out into the world and see other people, reciting mantras or, doing prostrations and circumambulations. And so therefore we're sort of less inclined to do that ourselves. We're not supported by the environment of practice in that way. And so it actually makes it difficult for us to sustain our own practice in many cases. And that's actually why Dharma centers are so important, so precious and important, and why we're putting so much energy into creating, for instance, that environment here, into building up the Dharma center here, because if there's a place where as a Dharma practitioner you can go, and when you go to a Dharma center, sometimes it makes you, you remember the Dharma, you feel inspired to do practice, and you feel affected by your surroundings, and it also kind of increases your own kind of determination or your own inspiration to engage in Dharma practice. And so that's why, Dharma centers, especially here in the West, are really so precious or so important, to seek out and to support.
근데 지 꼬마작스 기유직을 디 꼬마작스 꼬마장한 초보로 차비나 그 갈래 그 꼬마 차로 와. 그 갈래 차바로 차로 그래. 제가 나 얘기지 매직배 다 나서지 강주마지 타마다 너 산야지 여러 근데 그럼도 이냠도 디나 라야 탐복한 책임이 그 갈래 드리지 친이 차로. 예스. 된 3년 3회 아주 따뜻한 맛에 그냥 잡아드니 여러 와. 근데 뭐지 정보 장장 요비나 네 칼레 코티냐 분로비나 네 코 차바야 차는 거 스메세냐 차는
And so yeah, it's as beings, we're so easily influenced by others. We're so susceptible to our environment. So we're really affected by the people we're around in our surroundings. So that's why it's so important as practitioners to abandon harmful or negative places, or essentially also companions that are really a negative influence. For instance, people who steal, like if there's a group of thieves, for instance, or people who steal, and we start, or someone is a really honest person who doesn't steal, and then they become friends with this group of people who are into stealing. And then, at first they sort of start off saying, oh yeah, no, I'm not going to participate in this. I don't steal things. But gradually, in spending time with those people, eventually that person ends up, or winds up also stealing themselves, or they end up participating in the collective behavior. And likewise, when one hangs around with people who, smoke cigarettes and maybe take a lot of drugs or drink a lot of alcohol, and then at first, that person, who doesn't want to participate, and it could be, and they say, okay, I'm not going to participate, but I want to spend time with these people, and so that one ends up kind of involving oneself in these groups. And then even if one's intentions in the beginning is not to take on these negative habits, eventually because of the influence of those conditions, those surroundings, that situation that one has put oneself in, eventually one does end up kind of falling into that behavior. It's almost kind of inevitable that is the case. Same with violence. Those who are violent are people who kill others. Same situation. One can start off without being a really honest person, without the intention to engage in such negative activity. But if that if the individuals that one surrounds oneself with are engaged in a particular negative activity, or a habit like that, then it is really difficult for oneself not to take on the same habits or kind of negative activities of the group. So for that reason, it's really important that we pay attention to our conditions, our surroundings, and that we choose to avoid places and environments that are not healthy, or that are not a positive influence, that can in fact be harmful. Are you guys? Can you hear? Okay. I heard somebody go, I saw someone go like that, so I wasn't sure.
Yes, we hear well.
Okay.
No, you're fine. I could hear you.
Thank you.
Gordon Hudson.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
인디트네 제가 저디 고지 야보 차야라 가서 된 공티와래 humanbeing naturally 고 야보 차야다 근데 그 humanbeing 거랑라 진조 축쇼라고 고 두보 차나 차야 드리어서리 고 depending 한데 공티와나 유 들치바요서와 베는 가서다 디 녀모 힘바지 유 녀모 힘바티네 거랑서 곰바지리티네 파유네 야용 거랑서 파유네 타와 제 되네 자와 지지되네 공소 용역사래 그 용도되네 보내다 감정이야 하사용 하사네더니 지리되네 이나 자와 지역되고 코로나베 연단 약쇼치 배 약보요데스 이나양 다티가로 공소 지연로 지지 코로나지고 되네 도토베서 말와 야리 용마도 자와송 야갈래 버리 야갈래 안에더니 코로나로 고쳐다 단다 야다주 코로나다
Punta tesa ko tomsong tampo de sum yore.
시요
She yore. Okay. the Chanongi Payo, Tama
이건 맞아
Jiba.
봐요 말와.
Oh. Oh,
계단에.
okay. Then the Chik Nyang Jakarla Dro Matuba, Sum Jakarla Dro Tuba.
네.
Okay.
근데 공성 베미스 항상 하는데 또 정말 차이오레스. 텐데네 타고 쟁때 바이라 포라 루송도 따티도 고 탐보고 하고 말와 콜라 토콘도 텐데네. 텐데 미코 베샤라 유지 말와 셔다 텐데 가시에게지 오중에 베샤 테고 지지로 같이 보도라 텐데 지 강다야 공수 그룹지 요사와 그룹 가리오세다 텐데 지 콜레닝 바텐데 고마자 공베기 나올 텐데 중국에서와 텐데 고 텐데 그룹지 나올 텐데 추송도 와 때 추송도 텐데 예래 텐데 다가
So this is just actually the nature of human beings. We're so influenced, easily influenced. We're so susceptible to kind of falling into the views and habits that are demonstrated in our surroundings. And so actually, Drabanda says he
kita mesaya de la ko yabo komna kumyayowa doboyona kumyayowa tinji dela wotibes
so you know, as human beings, we can really easily be influenced by both positive ways and in negative ways. So if the environment or the situation that we enter into is one that is negative or that increases or that is sort of negative, then we easily pick up the negative habits of those expressed in our surroundings. And likewise, we can be influenced in a really positive way. If we're in a really positive environment, then we very easily adapt to be able to absorb kind of those positive habits and ways of being. So essentially, we're very malleable, and we're not independent. We're really interdependent, and so we really affect one another in a very deep way. And so there's an example of this. Actually, Drupal had a friend, and actually there was a group of monks. Actually, he came to he was from Kham, and he became a monk, and he ended up with a group of 3 other monks. So they were a group of 4, and they traveled from Kham to Lhasa with the intention to escape to India. But then all 3 of them were able to escape to India, but one of them was not able to. He didn't end up being able to make it. And so he remained in Tibet. The 3 other monks went to India, and they, joined the monasteries there, Zhangchu Bling actually, and they studied really hard, and they did a lot of practice, and they became really, really great practitioners and scholars, and they really developed a lot of really wonderful qualities. But the 4th one, who didn't make it, then he was sort of stuck in kind of central Tibet.
Actually, this 4th one is he's in the Tibet. He's more education. He's really good knowledge too.
So he actually started out as the one with kind of like the most qualities. He had had developed a lot of knowledge through study. He had great. He was really learned, or had studied a lot, and then he ended up sort of stuck in central Tibet without any money. And so he fell in with this group of kind of like bandits who actually had a business.
Of course, he don't know, so.
But at first he didn't know. He didn't realize who he was kind of getting mixed up with. And then he ended up, with this group of bandits who had a business of stealing, really antique, precious sacred objects or statues, and
from monasteries
and selling them And so he ended up, falling with this crowd, and then he himself ended up participating in this kind of behavior. He actually, eventually fully became, part of the group of these bandits.
Actually, sadly, then the Gamboba monastery, telekundape nimba zachimbo shuji yosarwa, the tambo koranki yo haku do koran haku. Then tamade ko the kundatele, namju the kundate sumienda con hante, caretaker, the Michigan Mato Yosamarwa, Tindi Yosamari, Yinayanta, tea gabla, not so the was on the Tawaji or the Sobema Degro, on to Mochikoma. The Komagilla visit, ko Amala, Amatugandoro, United, ko Amina, Manivici, Lahana, Nidio Sarawa, the Nidi, the consultant that they called the Tawata, the name she's no tree on it, that could have Komaja, the dark on many Tamayorawa. Then I consult the Kalichi, Kanda, many just said, then go the so much of a young Sarwa, you could Mamdayo Marwa, the young Segio Sarwa. Can Tiligine the neck on that good job, or the chief is the neck of Chava is.
So actually, it's a very sad story. What ended up happening. So there was a monastery, like Gamboba monastery, where there was a really old statue, like a really old, really precious statue, and so this monk, or this former monk, essentially knew that it was there, and so he also knew, that ordinarily there was only like one caretaker in the monastery who wasn't actually always there, who wasn't always around, and so he thought he led, the group of bandits there to steal the statue. And they thought that, they would probably not run into anybody. But then, as it turns out, the caretaker was there. And not only that, but there was a Drikung Kagyu monk who was a monk from Onto Rinpoche's monastery in India. And he was visiting his mother in Tibet. So he was at the monastery. And he was sleeping in the temple. And so when the bandits came to steal the statue, they found two people there, and they were surprised by this. And then maybe there was some rustle or some struggle kind of between them, and then they ended up killing both of the people, including this monk who was visiting from Sopema, with a knife, or I guess with it, because they didn't have guns, but they had knives, and so then they stole the statue and took off. So really, it's a very sad and tragic story, but that is what happened.
Oh, that thing that tend to okay, because you sambo yona, you sambo to me, because I get here like some do to me, many young get here like Koran, Ropa Mombo use. The Ropanga Hippe, Mope, Joba Dubu, Muyabot, the Yomaris. Yena young, Kokorala young, Hayuji part in the Seratam de Hungorwa, Pola, Tini Gigendo, Yamanyama Giganing back in the top. In a consult of Lojonji, Lojonte, Massive, Kepa, Massive, Lama Samboti, Chagadus. Then got hit on the Chicochi, Yayo, and the Payuna Mayaoyona, Chapanya, or Chapacha, the good.
So, didn't he Geshe Loju did it, or
Geshe love with all Limba.
Geshe de Sure.
That's a love of the Cheba. The history.
The Digi group number, give me check my
Marina Chetala.
Oh, okay.
In a really that of group.
Oh, group number, you're right. See, and then on the other hand, one of these monks who ended up escaping to Tibet, and he ended up, in a really positive situation where
he from east to the Tibet or central Tibet, not
Oh, so this is a different one or the same. So this is a different story where one monk went from Kham or Eastern Tibet to Central Tibet, or from Central Tibet to Eastern, from Central Tibet to Eastern Tibet, and he ended up in a situation where he was helped by some really kind geshes, who, you know, and of course he sort of, you know, had the same potential to either kind of meet up with positive influences or to meet up, you know, with some kind of negative groups or crowds. He didn't have any money. He didn't have any sort of planned situation, but he ended up falling into a situation where there were, you know, benevolent people who helped him, these geshes, and then they ended up influencing him, you know, to join Sarah Monastery.
Yeah, so same way. So my friend told me, so he's with them from East Tibet to in the Central Tibet. So normally this from East Tibet, a lot of monks study in the Central Tibet. So there's the Gelug biggest monastery, Sera and Drepung. So sometimes I think some people is from East Tibet, so it's no education, no knowledge. So also this kind of some people is not really nice person, but then they went to the Sera monastery, and then the old, you know, senior. The same in the from Tibet, so they meet them, then they teach. So then later on, so those monks is very kind of famous sort of scholar.
They became famous scholars, and yeah.
So, but some come to the same thing. This stay in the Lhasa, the same way we story. So
then they kind of fell in with bad groups, and,
right,
and became kind of, you know, took up bad behavior.
Right. So they need to cause them get under
So mainly these stories are just to kind of illustrate this point that is being made here, which is how important one's environment is, you know, how much of a part that plays, you know, in kind of one's development, or how it affects one in life. So the place that one the place is so important, depending, you know, on
what you know, you more than the Davis, another Tangi Contua Nigeria. Something of Dada in the Uvina. Tangi Kong, Human, Murab, generation to generation, the Dada in the Uvina. Then you go to Tambonium, maybe in a Dari, Lapita, or the power, Nipa, by Dari say on the water, or Nikatin, Bobo Dari say out in Tombe Garret, Rayakon sound. What a teenage Panshavina. Consultation my own, but in Roshavina, got no motive, my rest, that he showed it and get you.
So in any case, as it says in the verse, as one abandons harmful or negative places, then disturbing emotions gradually diminish. And then it goes on to, so also in the same, you know, resorting to secluded places, but then also in the above verse, when it talks about abandoning one's homeland. So for instance, if one's homeland is a situation where there's sort of, what is the word, like resentments that are built up, you know, family resentments that are built up through generations because of, you know, one's father who had an enemy that was based on an enemy that was developed, you know, from when, you know, his father was, you know, maybe, you know, had some conflict with that same family. And so then this sort of resentment and hatred is actually even just passed down, you know, through kind of these generations, these attitudes that have been established, you know, for generations, you know, that have to do with sort of, you know, family feuds. And so then, for instance, if, if one is in a situation like that, and then one sees, you know, this someone from this family, you know, that your family just despises, and then you just see that person, and then your mind is immediately consumed with anger. So then the point here is to avoid, you know, being in an environment where that kind of thing is easily stimulated, and instead to surround oneself, you know, where that kind of thing is, in a situation where that kind of thing is not going to occur.
Okay, so we can do lunch break here.
And we have visitors who have oh, sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
From the Sangha.
Okay, thank you.
We'll stop the annoying.
Right.
Woohoo!
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Now we're going to dedication. Or you?
Yeah. So everyone can participate in the birthday.
Yay! Okay, let's all play.
Yeah.
So thank you all, and we'll do the short dedication, and then we'll have, I noticed here that there are some requests for some questions, and so we will definitely have time for questions in the afternoon. So in the afternoon session, then we'll give more time for question and answer. So we'll see you back in an hour and a half then at 2:30.
All right.
So on page 24, by the virtues collected in the three times, by myself and all beings, and samsara and nirvana, and by the innate root of virtue, may I and all sentient beings quickly attain unsurpassed, perfect, complete, precious enlightenment. May the teachings of the great Drikungpa Ratna Shri, who is omniscient, Lord of the Dharma, Master of interdependence, continue and increase through study.